The world was destroyed. The once vibrant cities that were full of smiles and laughter is now buried in darkness and in ruins, with the only remaining things are corpses sprawled everywhere. The world has become desolate of almost all living beings. A guy gripping his spear and mumbles out, "Tell me," as he clenches his teeth and grips his spear even harder and mumbles out once again, "Why?" Through his gritted teeth, he bellows out, "Why? Why did everyone have to die because of you? Heavenly demon! Why did you have to end the world?" Out of nowhere a voice echoes out, "You have done well, awaken Li Shinhyik." Vega, the Star Weaver goddess of Lyra, descends and looks down at Shinhyik and says, "You have killed the heavenly demon, and the world is finally saved from his vile clutches." Shinhyik hunched over and says, "Ha! Saved? Ha ha, seriously?" He looks up and bellows out, "Shout your fucking mouth. How can you even say that this can be counted as saving the world? That monstrous thing has destroyed everything and killed everyone. There is nothing left of this so-called world." As we rewind time about 10 years ago, one day, gates appeared all over the world that connected to all kinds of different realms. Mysterious and savage monsters poured out in endless waves from these gates, and the world quickly became hell on earth. As the world was in ruins and the monsters almost have taken over the entire world, these transcendent type beings called Celestials arrived. And each of these Celestials have marked the humans with their constellations, that they called stigma. It gave the humans a way to fight back these monsters, and that is when the humans were born to understand the stars. And those humans became superhumans known as Awakeners. And they became humanity's last hope, and slowly the world was regaining its light. But then out of nowhere, he appeared. The sky's devil known as the heavenly demon, Guan Ojin. Although at first he was just an ordinary awakener at first, but he possessed the black heaven trait that allowed him to absorb stigmas from any and all awakeners, even the power from the Celestials themselves. And just like that he quickly and rapidly grew stronger. Every single awakener, and even the Celestials, banded together by the thousands, and combined their strength in order to destroy the heavenly demon. But that monster, he had slaughtered every single one of them by himself and devoured the Celestials. The apostles, the warriors, the Celestials, everyone. Everyone has died at the hands of that monster, and that was the end of this world. As the goddess was looking at him, filled with sympathy, and says, "But the heavenly demon is now dead. You have killed him. Awakener Li Shinhyik, did you not?" Getting no response, the goddess then spreads out her arms and says, "For slaying the heavenly demon and saving the world, in accordance with the pledge of the stars, I shall grant you one wish." The pledge of the stars, it can only be used by the Celestials of the North Star, and allowed them to grant any wish. As Shinhyik stands up with a look of determination and says, "I will going back. Please send me to the past." The goddess squints her eyes and says, "Are you saying your wish is to regress?" Surprised, she blurts out, "Are you insane? Are you planning to repeat that horrible past? What if you make things even worse than they already are?" Shinhyik looks at the goddess and says, "I know it's a gamble, but it would be completely different this time." He pats his chest and bellows, "I'll change it. I will change everything. I won't let things become a desolate wasteland." The goddess looks at his serious face and thinks to herself, a regressor is a unique existence that can defy the fate of the world. But, with a sigh, she says, "Fine. In accordance with the pledge of the stars, I shall send you back in time." But just then Shinhyik says, "There is just one more thing. This is only a proposal and not a wish, Vega, but I would also like you to bestow me your stigma of Lyra." As her eyes almost bulge out of her head from listening to his request, and couldn't help but think this guy is an idiot, and says, "You do know that the human body can't endure my stigma? That is why the heavenly demon was unable to devour it, because his body would not be able to control the power, and just combust." In anger, she looks down at Shinhyik with a look of disdain and says, "Do you think you would be different just because you saved the world?" With a look of desperation, and pleads with the goddess, "There would be no point in returning to the past if I couldn't even do that much. I am sure you know that already, don't you, Vega? With a sigh she says, fine, Heaven-defying Star. When you return. And in a monotone voice she says, you will have my stigma of Lyra and I will visit you myself. Surprised by her declaration, Shinhyuk says, but if you return, won't you lose all your memories if you go back in time? Vega looks at Shinhyuk and says, yes, that is true. I will not be able to remember this timeline, but regardless, if you hold my stigma, then my past self would be able to recognize you as my regressor. That is, of course, if you can even survive it, and if you're able to endure and survive, then my past self might even make you my apostle. Flabbergasted, he couldn't help but think, are you serious? You'll be able to become a North Star's apostle? An apostle is something that all awakeners coveted but were unable to achieve. It would be an amazing opportunity. Shinhyuk couldn't help but think to himself, now that all my preparations are completed. Heavenly Demon, I have memorized your face. I will find where you first became an awakened. All I have to do is wait for you to appear and return to you what you have done to me. I will return the favor by killing you from the very start. The goddess cuts off his monologue and says, now I shall begin the pledge. Looking up at the goddess, she then gives him a final warning, please, be careful, Heaven-defying Star. After hearing her final warning he goes into deep thought, everything that I have lost, everyone I could not protect, and everything that I have regretted, I will without a doubt change it all. I will not let the past repeat itself. As Shinhyuk was floating through time, he was receiving system prompts saying, the stigma of Lyra is being granted to the body of Awakener Lee Shinhyuk. As the stigma of Lyra is being granted, the existing stigma of Pixis will disappear. Just then, he started receiving warning prompts saying, warning! As the stigma of Lyra is too powerful, Awakener Lee Shinhyuk's body is collapsing. Unable to see the prompts, he was receiving flashbacks of his younger brother, Lee Woohyuk. He was strong enough to be chosen by one of the 12 zodiacs, but he was killed by the heavenly demon. As he lost all hope, and on his knees kneeling before his dead brother and yelling, why? Why are you doing this? What has he ever done to you? The heavenly demon just stares at him and says, I don't know. If you hadn't abandoned me back then this might not have happened. As he opens his eyes, he was confused, huh? That face. Where have I seen him before? Startled, he receiving more warning prompts that says, warning, you are now entering an unstable state. Just then the stigma's power starts going out of control and starts yelling in pain, Krah. Then out of nowhere, he opens his eyes wide, as he hears a familiar voice from behind, what the hell? Why the fuck is this bastard suddenly acting like this all of a sudden? This voice? As he turns around and looks over his shoulder, he sees a guy looking at him. With a look of distraught the guy asks, dude, are you alright? Shinhyuk looks up and was completely flabbergasted. The heavenly demon? No way. He is already in front of me? But how? Just then, he coughs up blood, followed by blood leaking out of all his orifices. He then receives more warning prompts saying, the disturbance of your emotions has intensified your already unstable situation. Due to your state, the stigma has become more erratic. Your body is about to be completely destroyed. Completely ignoring the prompts, he could only think, why? Why is the heavenly demon already here? No! I have to. Hold on, but... Just then he recalls the goddess saying, your odds of survival are less than 1 in 1,000. No, it won't even be 1 in 10,000. As he slowly closes his eyes he couldn't help think, so in the end, I wasn't able to become that one. Then all of a sudden you can hear teeth grinding together and someone yelling, he's dead? You. Fuck. You fucking pussy. You should have at least killed them all before you fucking died. As he picks up a stick and starts yelling, what the hell am I supposed to do now? I'm not even a fucking awakener. Damn it. Shit. What the hell was that? I can't believe someone could just die from kneeling on the ground. Who the fuck dies like that? As he starts patting Shinhyuk down. He has to have something that I could use, right? I mean, he can't only rely on his stigma. Just then he notices something odd and says, "Huh? What is up with this stigma? I have seen it before." Then all of a sudden he receives a system prompt saying, "The Black Heaven's first awakening will now begin." Dumbfounded he says, "Huh? What the fuck is this? Black Heaven is absorbing the stigma of Lyra." As his eyes bulge out, "What? Black Heaven? What the fuck?" Just then he gets blasted full of energy, and receives multiple prompts. Unable to read the prompts, the only thing he can do is yell out in pain, "What the fuck is this? Arg." As he plops down deflated and drained of any energy, finally able to catch his breath, he couldn't help but think, is it finally over? That was fucking hell. Finally able to read the prompts, "You have completely absorbed the stigma of Lyra. The power of the stigma will be adjusted accordingly to the stage of the Black Heaven." Looking down and still dazed, "Huh? A system window? Aren't Awakeners the only ones who can see these fucking things?" As he pulls the front of his shirt down to look at his chest and sees a stigma, and he couldn't help but mumble, "I'm pretty sure that bastard has this." Then out of nowhere a woman descends down right in front of him, lighting up the place like a beacon, and says, I am certain I felt my stigma's presence around here." Completely dumbfounded and think, what the fuck? The woman then continues, "The fact that you have my stigma and I have never given it out to anyone before would only mean you are the Heaven-defying Star, the one who defies fate, the one and only savior of a world that is destined to meet its end. So then, that would make you my regressor." Completely lost, dumbfounded and dazed, he could only think, "Huh? What the fuck? I am definitely not your guy." Only to be blasted once again. As the goddess Vega descends, she says to Ojin, "O Heaven-defying Star, the prophesied savior of a soon-to-be doomed world, you are the regressor, huh?" With a look of bewilderment he could only think, what the fuck is this lady even talking about? I am a regressor? Who the fuck is this regressor? Because I certainly haven't regressed before. Is this lady a glowing nutcase? As the scene changes to Ojin's past, "Ojin, you are an orphan. You have to understand your situation better and listen to everything I say." As this old baldy tries to calm the young Ojin, he says, "To fool others is quite simple. You have to make them hear and see the things that they want, and thus they will create their own illusions inside their made-up delusions." As the old man with the gleaming bald head smiles and says, "So Ojin, how about it? Do you think that you can make that happen?" With a cocky expression on the young Ojin's face, he just smirks and doesn't say a word. He just flips him off with a fully erected bird. For the young Ojin, at the age of 8 years old, he lived in an orphanage that made him scam others for the benefit of the orphanage director. After the old man quits beating Ojin, he wipes the sweat off his face and says, "Okay Ojin, say that one more time, what kind of place is this orphanage?" Sprawled out on the floor, he opens one eye and flips him off again and grins and says, "A good place." The old man loses his temper and a vein bulges on his gleaming dome and says, "Ho, you fucking brat. Just because I am being nice." As he starts rolling up his sleeves and starts bellowing, "Do you want to die too?" But before he could even finish his lecture, a young girl came flying up behind him yelling, "Don't bully Ojin, Baldy," and smashes the old man in the balls with a swift kick. This makes the old man instantly keel over and flop onto the ground. With sweat of his bald head, he barely squeals out, "You little shits. Get back here! And how many times do I have to tell you? I'm not bald yet," making the kids scurry away. This is Song Haun at the age of 10. She was the only reason why the young Ojin was able to endure his hellish life during his time at the orphanage. He was always made to spew bullshit about the director to make him sound like a great man, but in reality the director would just beat everyone to the point where it wouldn't leave any marks. That is when he had the thought that he couldn't die a dog's death in a shithole like the orphanage. But fortunately or unfortunately that was also the time that the gates opened up all around the world, and along with the monsters that came spewing out of them that no one has ever seen or even heard of before. But just as the entire world has turned into a hellscape, that is when the Celestials appeared, holding the power of the constellations, granting their stigmas to certain individuals to wield their power. Later, they were known as awakeners, but for Ojin, living in this world was easier than living in the orphanage. As the scene changes, it brings us to the current day, where Ojin was walking away from an awakener while wiping some sweat off, saying, "Thanks for your hard work," while the red-headed guy laughs joyously and says, "You as well, Mr. Jino, will you be at the next gate as well?" As Ojin turns around and smiles deviously and says, "Of course I'll be there." But inwardly he thought, how could I leave and not scam these fat sheep? Ojin came up with an alias to scam awakeners that was known as Jino. He would do his best to drain all their hard work, their blood and sweat like a sloppy fat leech, by joining them acting as a high-ranking awakener. He would trick other awakeners, by acting like he would support them as the rear guard, and after making a decent cut from the spoils he would split, and just like today, he would pick out a pushover like any other day. This unlucky fool was Lee Shinhyuk, as Shinhyuk bellows out in surprise, "What? You are an apostle of Aquarius?" As he stutters, "Isn't that one of the 12 zodiacs?" With a devious grin, Ojin laughs it off and says, "You don't need to be that surprised." As he rubs the back of his head sheepishly and says, "It might be one of the zodiacs, but I am only a 1-star apostle." But in reality, Ojin isn't even an awakener. He believed that he became the perfect scammer, the scammer of scammers. Shinhyuk then says, "Man, one of the 12 zodiacs. I am nothing compared to one of them. I am just an apostle of Pixis." Ojin goes with the flow and says very enthusiastically, "Wow! An apostle of Pixis. Isn't that the stigma that has control over all directions of a compass? And it also gives the ability to wield any weapon with complete mastery?" Shinhyuk just laughs with embarrassment and says, "It's not that big of a deal." Ojin just smirks and thinks, "That's it, what a fool. Now that I have my prey, let's begin." As he tries to put on his most amiable smile and says, "My name is Gwon Jino. It must have been fate that we have met like this. We should form a party?" Confused, Shinhyuk tilts his head to the side and says, "Sure, I would be happy to team up. But why would you want to team up with someone like me?" Ojin just rubs the back of his head embarrassingly and says, "Well, you see, I'm not that good with controlling my stigma, even though I have been a 1-star for over a year now." Ojin then smiles and pulls down his shirt and says, "Even though it's a little embarrassing, but let's show off our stigmas." Which makes Shinhyuk blurts out, "Oh my god! That is one of the 12 zodiac stigma." Ojin couldn't help but chuckle and think, this fool would never be able to figure out that this is a fake because he engraved the mark on his chest with a knife. Ojin turns and looks at Shinhyuk, which is smiling happily, and says, "This is a low-ranking gate, but we should still be careful just in case because it still has a high lethality rate." Shinhyuk just nods with enthusiasm. As they march through the gate, Ojin says to Shinhyuk, "Now then, Mr. Shinhyuk, I will give you a buff before we head into battle." As he thinks in his head, "Now then, let's begin the performance, shall we?" Ojin activates a micro's LED and starts chanting, "Celestial Aquarius, heed my call. Please shine a starlight that brightens up the darkest of roads for this humble apostle." Just as he finished his chant, the daylight of the lake with a mixture of fluorescent paint with ground-up glass, he sprinkles it onto Shinhyuk's head like it was some magical pixie dust and says, "Good, you're all good to go now." After the so-called buff was all said and done, Shinhyuk gets all perked up and says, "Wow! This is the so-called power of the Aquarius's stigma? I can feel it. My body feels light, and I can feel my body explode with energy as if it is coming alive. Thank you, Mr. Jino. I will now show you my strength." Just as he take off, Ojin couldn't help but scoff inside his head, "Is this guy an idiot? Did he just eat the glass dust and says he's full of energy? That can't be good for him." As he blasted forward slaying all the monsters, he couldn't help but blurt out in the midst of battle, "I can really feel it. I can feel this great buff deep inside my bones." After Shinhyuk had killed off all the monsters, Ojin came running up and with a dazzling smile and a wave and says, "I will go and clean up the monsters and pick up all the starstone." As he sets off, he couldn't help but think that this guy is pretty skilled. Maybe I could earn a fortune off of him today. As he is picking up all the starstones, he looks at the starstone in his hand and couldn't help but think, Even though these stones can be used by infusing their stigma into them, but there is no way I would let anyone else pick up my income. While Ojin was busy frolicking around happily, picking up all the stones, he had failed to notice that his surroundings had become suspiciously quiet, deathly quiet. Just then he hears Shin-hyuk stuttering in panic off to the side, so he looks over and notices his pale countenance. He then looks around with urgency, only to notice that they were completely surrounded by monsters. By this time Shin-hyuk finally quits stuttering and asks the question, "Why are there so many ant horns?" As Ojin stares into the eyes of the beast, it was at that moment that he knew that something has gone wrong. As they turn around to run, Shin-hyuk yells, "This way, Mr. Gino." As Ojin was running, he couldn't help but wonder, what the fuck is going on? He has been going in and out of these low-level gates for a very long time, but this was the first time that so many monsters have gathered together all at once. As they were booking it down the forest with the ant horns right on their tails, Shin-hyuk couldn't help but cry out loud, "Damn it! They're too fast! They are gaining on us. We can't lose them at this rate." As Shin-hyuk turns his head, yelling in panic, and looks at Ojin. Just then Ojin had a terrible feeling in his gut. With a look of shock and disbelief, he could only think, "This fucking bastard is looking at me. No way, he isn't going to." As if his premonition had came true, he found a boot in front of his face. Unable to dodge, he gets smashed in the face from Shin-hyuk's boot and sent flying towards the monsters, only to barely hear Shin-hyuk's voice getting further and farther away saying in a regretful tone, I'm sorry." As Ojin gets back up in a daze, he instantly felt rage build up from within him and he bellows out, "You son of a bitch! They'll fucking kill you!" Coming back to his senses for a moment, and came to a realization. With fear he slowly turns his head and could only say, "Oh fuck." As he gets up and starts running once again, he sees Shin-hyuk crying out once again, "At this rate both of us will die." Ojin only responded by saying, "You fucking pussy. Let's die together then, you little bitch." And as if the heavens had felt Ojin's rage, Shin-hyuk gets blasted with a bright light that makes him scream like he's dying. Looking at this scene before him, Ojin was so dumbfounded he forgot to keep running and could only think, "What the fuck? What the hell is wrong with this bastard?" As he starts rummaging through Shin-hyuk's shit and cursing to himself, "You fucking piece of shit. If you're just going to die, you have to at least have something useful on you." Just then he noticed a stigma that wasn't Pixis's on his chest and mutters, "What the fuck?" As he drags his hand over it and thinks, "Isn't this the constellation of Lyra?" Out of nowhere, followed by a ding, a prompt appeared in front of Ojin's face saying, "Black Heaven has begun its first awakening." And then she appeared, saying I was a regressor. Like, what the hell is she talking about? Like, is she talking about someone coming from the future? What future? My future is going to end in less than 5 minutes from now, from these mutts behind me. The goddess Vega just stares at Ojin questioningly, but he was still lost in his own thoughts, thinking to himself, "She said that I possess her stigma, that she hasn't given it out to anyone before." But wait, wasn't her stigma just on Shin-hyuk's chest just a moment ago, holding his chest tightly from the stress? And thought to himself, I have no clue how this all happened, but I somehow used this ability called Black Heaven and had absorbed the dead Shin-hyuk's stigma. But it wasn't Shin-hyuk Pix's stigma, it was Lyra. Wait. Then that means... As he looks back at the dead Shin-hyuk's body and thinks, doesn't that mean that Shin-hyuk was a regressor? Just before Shin-hyuk died, he lit up like a Christmas tree. But that also happened to me as well when I absorbed his stigma. Still looking at his dead body, startled, and thought, after that, the Black Heaven has transferred the stigma to me. Feeling determined, he couldn't help but think, I don't know why all this has happened, but... The goddess, tired of the silence, starts complaining, "Why are you not answering me? Are you not the regressor? Because I definitely felt the Heaven-defying Star's presence from here." Coming out of his daze and says, "You are right." As he slowly gets up from the ground and with a clear mind, in order to get out of this situation alive he will have to do what he does best. As he stands up straight with a look of determination, he blurts out as if he is even trying to convince himself, "I am a regressor." And as if there were imaginary birds chirping in the background, Vega just stares at Ojin as if he were an idiot, and with a deadpan face she just hums. She just folds her arms across his chest and bobs her head up and down smiling and says, "Just as I thought, you're definitely the Heaven-defying Star." Ojin just bobs his head up and down in return and says, "Yes, yes, that is right," while inwardly thinking, "Holy fuck. Did she actually fall for it?" Trying to keep a straight face from not bursting out and start laughing, to think, a being who possesses a power that no mere mortal would ever dare to oppose, and here I am, scamming a godlike existence. There is no way that I would die from this, right? Vega cuts off his train of thought and says, "Oh my, I would like to have a long chat with you about the future that you have experienced. But there seems to be some trivial things in the way." With a smile that is so bright that it could light up the surroundings plastered on her face, and says, "This esteemed one is looking forward to see how strong the power of the Heaven-defying Star is." And with a stiff face, Ojin turns his head creakily and looks back with horror and says, "So what you're saying is I..." As Ojin goes pale with sweat dripping down his face and says, "I'll deal with them and show you my power?" With a sweat giggle, Vega then says, "Foo foo foo, yes, and go all out. You don't have to worry about me." Ojin could only cry inwardly and thought to himself, "That is totally not what I'm worried about. God damn it." As the goddess Vega was hovering in front of Ojin with her arms folded across her chest and says to him, "Now show me the limits of the Heaven-defying Star's power, because I am truly looking forward to it." Ojin just slowly looks over his shoulder and sees all the monsters behind him. He turns pale and starts to sweat mad buckets and mumbles out, "Yes, I will get right on it." As the Anhorns begun to walk slowly towards Ojin while growling. Ojin then pulls out a glaive from God knows where, exhales deeply and takes a stance. With a look of determination but a little uncertainty, he tries to psych himself up with a quick pep talk, "My body is light as a feather. It may only be at a 1-star level, but it still is an awakener. I can do this. No problem." As the Anthorns launch at Ojin from all directions, he dashes forward and twirls his glaive masterfully, and with one fluid motion he kills a few with a single slash, which impresses the goddess Vega, making her little more curious. As Ojin was moving in and out, dicing monsters up, here and there, he could only ponder, what the hell is going on? It is as if my body could move on its own. While he was lost in his thoughts, he felt a presence from behind, and does a whirlwind slash, making him rethink, there is no way that facing off against these Anthorns should be this easy. And not even a second later of having those thoughts, he received a notification saying, "You have learnt the level 4 skill, Spearmanship of Pixis," which was soon followed by a splitting headache with someone else's memories. Of someone that was gripping a staff and hunched over panting, with sweat dripping down and staining the ground. And was venting in frustration by saying, "This is not enough. If I stop here, then I will never be able to catch up to my brother in my entire life." As Ojin watches him continue demolishing the wooden dummy, Ojin couldn't help but wonder, these memories, his every movement, thoughts and feelings are just flooding in. Could this be Shinhyuk's memories? But I don't recall Shinhyuk having a scar on his cheek, so I guess that this isn't him from the past. In other words, these are his memories of his future self. I wonder, did part of Shinhyuk's memories and skill get fused together with his stigma? And were 1-star awakeners always this strong? Because from what he could recall, they were definitely not this strong. After taking a moment, Ojin looks behind him only to notice the piled-up bodies of the dead monsters that were littered everywhere. Just as he was about to continue, Vega yells out, "Stop!" Confused, Ojin looks back at her questioningly. She then asks with a haughty demeanor, "What are you doing? Are you trying to show off by flaunting your powers in front of this esteemed one right now?" Hearing this, Ojin nearly stumbled over and with a look that makes him look like a retard and says, "Huh? A show? That's right, if you are not trying to show off, then why is it that you're not using any power from the stigma right now?" Hearing this, Ojin just blurts out like an idiot, "What?" He then thought, "So this whole time I haven't been using the stigma at all and I am this strong?" And what Vega said next almost made him fall on his face for the second time. "Ah, I see. So it's like this." While she is bobbing her head up and down, lost in her own world and mumbling out loud her thoughts. So even if you are a regressor, you still have no idea how to use a newly acquired power. It would be the same as if a newborn tries to learn how to waddle. With a dumbfounded look, Ojin just stares at her blankly and thinks to himself, "I can't believe it, she is actually coming up with her own explanation. Even so, this is a perfect opportunity. I will play the shit out of this baby role." So her blurts out, yes, that is right. My body is currently the same as a newborn." Happy with her conclusion, Vega just smiles and says, "Well then, it shall be the role of this esteemed one to help the baby learn how to walk," as she extends out her hand towards Ojin. He then receives a notification saying, "Vega has granted you a star's blessing," which made Ojin freeze on spot, with his new iconic look. Thinking, Did it just say Vega? That name, where have I heard that name before? But before he came to any conclusions, he received another prompt saying, "Your proficiency of Lyra's stigma has been temporarily increased." And before he could even contemplate on anything any further, he gets blasted by a bolt of blue lightning. Gritting his teeth and trying to endure the pain, he manages to grunt out a few words. "Next time, before you initiate something like this, you should at least." With tears in his eyes from the feeling of injustice, he charges forward and bellows out, "Give a proper warning next time. Because that hurt like fucking hell." As he activates a level 1 skill called Blue Lightning, and drives his glaive into the ground, causing an AoE lightning explosion that kills off the remainder of the N horns. As he stands straight, with a mixture of feelings between disbelief and exhaustion, he gasps for air. As he looks around at all the destruction that he has caused, he almost couldn't even believe that he was the one that has caused it. Thinking, with a single move, I almost obliterated everything. Wait a moment. This power isn't something that a 1-star awakener could achieve. Just what make the stigma of Lyra this strong? Wait moment. Thinking back, when I received the blessing, it said Vega? Right. As he finally just came to the realization, he starts wallowing in despair from the thoughts of the possible drawbacks. While lost in a daze, he mumbles out loud, "Vega? The Star Weaver girl?" While he's lost in thought, Vega just starts nodding to herself and says, Foo, as expected of a regressor, your ability to learn things are quite frightening. I am quiet can't." As she tilts her head in confusion and rests her face in her hands and asks in a questioning manner, "Did you just call out for this esteemed one?" Which makes Ojin flinch and tense up, thinking, "Fuck me. So, this is the real Vega? I am so fucked." The Celestials are ranked by strength. They are numbered from 10s to 100s, and there are some that are in the league of their own. And that's the league that even the 12 Zodiacs couldn't even compare to, like Polaris, Deneb, and of course Vega. They are at the apex of all Celestials. And one of them is directly behind me. And not only that, but I even had the gall to try and scam one of these apex beings. With slumped shoulders and thinking, yup, I'm fucked. Should I just come clean and confess? Fuck that, the damage is already done. Grabbing his head and wallowing in despair, thinking, if I confess now, she would probably just kill me off instantly, because gods don't even need a reason to kill a mere human. Vega just watched Ojin flop around like a shrimp out of water with a questioning gaze, wondering about his sanity. Just then, Ojin throws his glaive onto the ground and thought, there is no point in thinking about this any further, there is only one thing I can do. I will just have to keep up with the act. He turns around and starts walking towards Vega with slow and staggering steps. With a trembling voice he says, I miss you, Vega. With her arms still crossed, she became confused and asks, what? Ojin then takes her hand and says, it is me, Gwon Ojin. As tears drip onto her hand, in a dramatic tone and through sobs he says, I thought that I would never get to see you again. Either from fear or his acting skills, his body starts to tremble as he places his forehead on the back of her hand and says, "I'm so relieved. I'm so really," startled, and asks in a panicky voice, "What are you talking about? What in the world was the relationship between you and this esteemed one?" As he does an imaginary fist pump in his head, "Fuck yeah." And he keeps up with the sob act and says, "Alright, you don't remember, of course you wouldn't have any memories of me, no? I apologize for showing you such an unsightly sight." Vega then hesitantly responds by saying, "With your reaction just now, it is definitely not nothing. Speak, what is your relationship with this esteemed one?" As Ojin gives her a relieved but happy smile and says, "Later, I promise I will let you know everything later," while inwardly, he is thinking to himself, "I will have to just come up with things as I go and try to keep things mysterious, as if there is some grand story between us." With a sigh she says, "I see, so in the end it was like this, so this esteemed one ends up being extinguished. For some reason, I knew that it would be the fate of all celestials, is to be consumed by the darkness of the black heaven." With his eyes closed, Ojin just nods his head in understanding and says, "Yes, everything will eventually be consumed by the black heaven." Just then, he opens his eyes wide and thought, "Fuck! What did she say?" As sweat starts pouring down his face as if he is in a rainstorm and starts stuttering, "Did you just say BBB black heaven?" With another sigh she says, "That is right, if the black heaven is allowed to grow, the world is sure to be doomed." Ojin just starts laughing nervously. He starts to think, "I have the black heaven, so does this mean I will bring ruin to the world? Fuck it all." He then bellows out and says, "But I am right here, aren't I? I have returned." As he gets down on one knee and makes a pledge, "I swear right here and right now. I promise that I will protect you and I will not let the black heaven consume you." As she just stares at him with a contemplative look. She then removes her hand from his and says, "Then, the heaven-defying star, the one who can interfere with fate itself." She places her finger on his forehead and says, "I shall brighten your harsh path with this esteemed one's starlight." Just then Ojin receives multiple notifications in a row saying, "The Star Weaver girl, Vega has appointed you to be her apostle." Followed by, "The Black Heaven has absorbed the stigma's mana. The Black Heaven has acquired the Second Awakening's prerequisites." Just then, Vega asks, "Anyways, who is that poor child face down in the dirt?" With a solemn expression, he says, "This is someone who will become a vile and cruel person in the future. He will kill and plunder many innocent people, so I eliminated him now before he grows too strong." As he prays in his head, "Please don't resent me too much. Li Shinhyuk." Vega then says, I see, you truly are a regressor, to eliminate evil before it even has begun." Hearing this, Ojin just nods his head happily and says, "Of course. It is a method that only I, a regressor, could pull off." Just then Vega says, "There is one final warning I must give you." But before she could explain, she gets zapped and with a disgruntled expression she groans in pain. She then looks down at her hands and says, "I wish I could talk more with you, but the world laws have begun to restrict me," which confuses Ojin, so he asks in reply, "World laws?" She then says, "Yes, that is correct. I just gave you a blessing. Even if it was indirectly, it goes against the world laws, which we, as celestials, should never interfere with." As she turns around to leave, she then stops and says, "This esteemed one has to leave, but in a week's time, come to the sanctuary that this esteemed one resides in." And there, we can continue our discussion in further details, as Ojin watches her disappear in a bright light. He just flops onto the ground, completely exhausted, and mumbles out loud, "God damn it. There are way too many things going on all at once. It's going to end up frying my brain." As he places his hand over his heart, and thinks to himself, "Still, to think I would become an apostle of one of the celestials of the North Star." As he looks over his shoulder, "Thanks to you, my entire life has turned around, so thank you, Mr. Regressor." On his way back home from the gate, Ojin stops off at Wick D's and orders 2 Big Macs for $16. After receiving his order, he continues walking holding the bag in the air and with a disgruntled expression, and he couldn't help but lament in his heart, and says, "Why the fuck are these burgers so goddamn expensive?" as he walks through the door of his house and calls out, "I'm home." While removing his shoes at the entrance, he hears a feminine voice answering back, "Oh? You finally made it back?" In a lazy but tired tone, Ojin replies by saying, "Yeah, I am home," and flicks on the lights. As the room gets brighter, he sees a redhead sitting up in bed with a relieved smile on her face and says, "You are a little late today, aren't you?" This is Song Haun. She was the only support that Ojin had while growing up in the orphanage. With a goofy grin plastered all over her face, and she raises her 2 fingers and says, "Now that you're back, how about you give me a cigarette? Hurry up. Why are you just standing there giving me that look?" And with a sigh and an annoyed expression, Ojin just says, "The second I walk through the door, and you are already spouting bullshit." With a snicker, she giggles and says, "Oh ho, what do you mean by bullshit? Is that how you talk to your elders there, young man?" As Ojin was digging out a burger from the bag, he sneers and says, "Elder? PFT. My ass, you're an elder." Giggling to herself, she says, "I am 2 years older than you, so that would make me your elder, no?" Completely ignoring her banter, Ojin places a burger into Haun's hands and says, "Here, I bought some burgers," which makes Haun's face brighten up like a little child receiving candy and says, "Thanks." Song Haun is an awakener, but she ended up getting injured and lost her right leg and went completely blind, so in order to repay her for all the support that she has given to Ojin in the past, he has decided to take care of her and be her pillar in return. A long time has passed since they both lived at the orphanage together, and now they live together in this apartment. But every day their bond is growing stronger and stronger, which at times can be emotionally dangerous and a tad bit awkward at times. After Haun takes a bite out of her burger, she asks Ojin with a tone that was completely serious and says, "Hey Ojin? What is this?" Which confused him greatly and replies by saying, "Huh? What are you even talking about?" With a happy and excited expression plastered on her face, like she hasn't tasted anything like it before, and says, "Oh my god. Why is this so goddamn delicious?" Ojin just looks at her with amusement, and says, "That's because I bought it fresh, instead of the normal frozen ones." Which make Haun bellow out, "What? Did you get hurt or hit your head? Maybe you received a little bit of brain damage or something?" Which only made Ojin sigh, "It's because I have earned a little extra tonight." Which make Haun counter-reply by saying, "It's not like you haven't had extra money before." Ojin just says, "Well," and then he goes into deep thought and thinks to himself, "There is something very important that I need to buy, only need to save up just a little bit more." As he looks at Haun that is staring back at him with a questioning gaze and with sauce smeared on her cheek, he just ends up completely ignoring her question and says, "By the way, you have sauce smeared all over your face." Which makes Haun panic and exclaims out loud, "What? Really? Where?" While panicking and feeling self-conscious, she grabs the soda that Ojin places into her hand and yells out, "Hey! You could at least tell me where it is." Ojin just chuckles with a bit of amusement and says, "You don't have to worry about it, just eat, because either way, you are still ugly, with or without shit smeared all over your face." As he sits back down and still snickering, he then says, "I will start buying these burgers from now on, instead of those prepared frozen ones, and by the way, the burger that you just had all over your face is actually called a Big Mac, and also..." As Ojin starts to go off on a tangent, Haun notices something off, and asks, "Hey Ojin? Did something happen today?" As she gazes at Ojin, as if to say, "You better not fucking lie to me." He just stares at her and says, "Yeah, you could say that something has happened," as he thought to himself, "Fuck, she has sharp intuition, I really can't keep anything from her." He then leans forwards, placing his elbows on his knees, and just tells her straight, "I have awakened." Everything just went silent, an awkward silence, as he just stares at her for a response. After a little while she responds by saying, "You did what?" and drops her soda onto the bed, which spills its contents all over the sheets. As the scene changes, Ojin is sitting on the swings and sighs, thinking to himself, "Now that is over and done with, I can finally have time to relax." As he closes his eyes and feels the cool night breeze brushing past his face and thinks to himself, It has gotten quite late from her harsh interrogation, but I guess it were to be only natural for her to be so surprised. With a grim expression while thinking back, how exactly would a person begin to explain to his childhood friend that he is scamming a goddess and impersonating a regressor, all at once? Shaking his head and pushes everything to the back of his mind and thinks to himself, I guess it's time to digest and go over everything, as he pulls up all his notifications. The first thing he obtained was his innate ability called Black Heaven, and the second thing is his trait, which has 3 additional properties. The first is called Stigma Absorption, which can absorb other people's stigmas mana and store it inside Black Heaven. The second is called Black Curtain, which allows Ojin to hide all the other stigmas that he possesses. The third ability is called Transmission, which allows the user to read some memories of the previous stigma holder, to a certain degree that is based on the awakening stage. And the last thing is called Possess Stigma, which can designate any stigma to be the main stigma. As Ojin thought back to the time where he had the conversation with the goddess, he could remember that Vega had told him that the person who owns Black Heaven would bring ruin to the world, as he brought his hand to his chin and thought, so sometime in the future, I would be the one to bring destruction to the world. As he tries wrapping his head around the whole ordeal, getting tired of thinking so much, he just rubs his head violently from feeling frustrated and couldn't help but wonder, just what the hell happened to me in the other timeline? As he strokes his hair back while in deep thought, no matter what, and by any means, I can never get caught, because the moment that they find out that I have the ability to absorb stigmas, then they will know that I have Black Heaven, and then everything would be revealed to them. As Hei lets out a long and heavy sigh, he couldn't help but lament inside, just why the fucking hell did I have to get dragged into all this mess? As he wraps his arms around the chains of the swing, he then leans backwards and thinks to himself, putting all that aside, the real problem now is how am I going to move forwards from here on out? As he gazes at the moon while the light reflects off of his eyes, in deep contemplation, and says, a regressor, huh? Just what can I do to make me seem more like a regressor? For now, I guess I could start by removing any and all suspicions from Vega, by getting her to acknowledge me, and to do that, I would have to increase the strength of my stigma, by gaining more stars. As he sits up and places his hand over his stigma and thinks out loud, there is already a ton of mana stored inside Black Heaven, so the next major thing to do would be to increase the proficiency and skill handling of the constellation's power. As he looks back up at the moon in thought and says, I guess it will be another gate run tomorrow. In that case then, I guess it would be time to head to bed, as he gets up from the swings and starts walking. He receives a notification on his phone. As he scrolls through the articles, he notices a particular article that caught his attention, that mentions a certain dungeon, located in Sinhyungdong, that had an anomaly, groups of over 20 ant horns herded together that had created multiple victims inside the gate, which makes Ojin think to himself, an anomaly? Hey, was that not the gate that we went into earlier? So that was the reason why there were so many of them grouped together. A mutant, huh? In a gate, there is a low chance of a mutant monster spawning, even though it is a very low chance of it happening. That only makes them more unique and stronger than their normal counterpart monsters. And in some cases, they get an ability that allows them to control a horde monsters. As he thought back to the time where he was swinging and waving a twig at them, trying to fend them off, he couldn't recall ever seeing one present, but it wasn't exactly like he was in the right mind to pay any attention to those details. As he thought about it for a bit, he starts laughing with a demented smile and says, it looks like my destination has already been decided for me. As the scene changes to the next day, as he was walking around near the gate, he could hear some stronger individuals calling out for some new members to join up to party, and the weaker ones are yelling to be luggage carriers. As Ojin just strolled around with his arms behind his back like he's on vacation, he was observing his surroundings and couldn't help but think to himself, even though they announced that no one should enter the gates, there seems to be even more people here than usual. As Ojin just stood there pondering with his fingers on his chin like he is some wise sage, deciding whether or not he should team up with other individuals just to be safe, but ultimately his greed won over in the end. So eventually he finds himself standing in the middle of the gate, alone, with one hand on his hip and another gripping his glaive that is hung over his shoulder, while yelling, "Let's get this fucking party started, shall we?" As he was walking through the forest and parting shrubs off to the side, he ends up stopping just before a tree, because he felt some presences lurking and trying to creeping up behind him, so he grips his glaive that was strapped to his back. Just as he turned around, like a symphony of growling and barking, he noticed that he was getting rushed at by multiple ant horns. And just as he was about to take a stance, he noticed another bastard sneaking up from behind him. So he grips his glaive and uses his blunt end and smashes it down on top of the ant horn's head and gets pummeled into the ground. After finishing the one-sided beating, he noticed he was about to get pounced on from behind, once again. Ojin then dodges the pounce by ducking under the ant horn, which makes the monster flies over him. And just as the ant horn was about to land, it felt as if something was off, so it tried to turn around to take a look, only to notice that Ojin had gripped his hind leg. While holding the ant horn upside down with one arm, Ojin then looks down at the other monster, that has his head pressed into the ground and feeling aggravated. He says, "And where the fuck do you think you're going? If you guys are going to come at me, then..." He lifts his leg and stomps down onto the head of the ant horn, making it blow up into chunks that flew in all directions. And then he looks at the one that he is still dangling in the air and yells, "And you should pay the fucking price," as he shifts his center of gravity and does an overhead throw, and like a bullet, the ant horn gets launched through the air, directly towards his four brethren. That takes them all out, as if he were using monsters to bowl with, which makes smoke and dust float through the air. As Ojin looks down at his hands and with a mixture of feelings, that is between shock and disbelief, he could only think that this just proved his hypothesis: he is definitely stronger than the average one-star awakeners. To be able to lift and throw an ant horn with just one arm, as he looks over at all the damage he has caused from the improvised ant horn rocket, it is definitely no simple feat. As he looks at all the dead bodies on the ground and his greed kicked in and pushed everything to the back of his mind, as he crouches down and thought, "Now this is where the money lies," and starts removing the star stones from all the dead bodies. With the last star stone removed, he pinches the stone between two fingers and held it above his head and directs some light, as he inspects the quality of the sparkling and gleaming stone through his squinted eyes and says, "Yup, this is definitely worth about 8K, and because of these babies I can see why everyone would want to become an awakener." After collecting all the stones, he hears some rustling bushes behind him. He slowly stands back up and wipes the dirt off his clothes and says, "Now then." He looks over his shoulder with a mocking smile and says, "What happened? Did you come rushing back because you smelled the charred remains of your little friends?" As Ojin just stares at this behemoth, with blazing red energy from either being a mutant, or just from anger from being mocked at and getting his underlings slaughtered. Ojin watches the mutant just standing there, growling. He chuckles to himself and says, "Yup, this is definitely a mutant." Just then, the mutant lets out a loud roar, and charges directly at Ojin as if he were a boar. Snickering with amusement, Ojin starts taunting the monster by saying, "Oh?" With his hand gripped onto his glaive he says, "Are you serious? You're just going to charge at me like that? And here I thought mutants were smarter than the others. Or is it because you are mutant that you have no fear?" Ojin just takes a step back and stretches his right arm behind him, and with all his strength for another throw, he then looks at the monster as if it were already dead and says, "Well then," as his Lyra's stigma starts to glow on his chest, and activates his level 1 skill, Thunderfall. His eyes then start to glow with a blazing blue electric energy, and then bellows, "You should get a solid beating," and launches the glaive that was coated with the same blue energy at the mutant. As it soared through the air, like a blue beam cannon, and blasted the mutant into pieces. After everything settled down, Ojin was frozen still with his arms still stretched out, and completely confused with flabbergasted expression on his face as he thought, "I knew I was stronger than the average awakeners, but did it seriously get murked just like that? A single hit?" As he just stood there, staring at the burnt corpse of the mutant, while his arm was still extended outwards, flabbergasted, he couldn't help but exclaim out loud, "What the fuck? Did that actually happen?" He then goes over and reclaims his glaive that was still smoking from his previous attack, and notices that a few of the ant horns still remained alive. They were huddled together, shivering in fear. When the ant horns noticed his gaze upon them, they turned around and ran for their lives. Ojin then bellows out, "Hey! You little bastards! If you are going to just leave like that, the most decent thing you could do is at least leave your star stones behind." Then out of the blue, Ojin felt some fluctuations going out of control inside his body, which was followed by a notification, "Ding! Your stigma of Lyra has been upgraded to a level 2 star stigma," making his stigma glow and a new star got engraved onto his chest. Ojin's body then started to begin to glow. While he was basking in the feeling of his body becoming more powerful, he just stared down at his hands in disbelief and couldn't help but think inwardly, how was this even be possible? It hasn't even been a single 24 hours and yet, Ojin has leveled up from 1 star to 2 stars. Was it because Black Heaven has stored a massive amount of mana? Still crouched over the mutant's carcass, giggling like a confused madman, he then says, "Fuck it, just gather all the materials and go back home and call it a day." But just then, some people began to approach Ojin from behind. The guys then called out, "Yo bro! Did you by chance or happen to kill this monster just now?" Hearing someone talk, Ojin then turns around to look at the unwelcome guests. As Ojin just stared at these thug-looking guys, they start getting closer towards Ojin, a guy with a comb over and his hands placed behind his back like some grand master. He chuckles with amusement, and with a condescending tone, he says, "Oh wow. Even though it's just an ant horn, it is still a mutant, so it shouldn't be so easy and not just anyone could single-handedly kill it." The blonde-haired guy with his hair tied back, as he strode forwards with a hand in his pocket, he then arches an eyebrow and says, "Both of us are 3-star apostles of the hunting dogs. Nice to meet you." Staying vigilant, Ojin just observes the two, trying to get a read on them and thought, by any means, there shouldn't be 2 high rankers running around in a low-level gate like this, unless they must be here for the mutant. While Ojin observed these two, he thought inwardly, with their looks and demeanor, it would definitely be a crime if they were not here to kill and rob others. As the atmosphere grew cold, the comb-over guy's face became dark and says, "It's not nice for someone to come and steal other people's targets. How are you gonna compensate us?" Ojin just sighs inwardly and thought, "I definitely nailed it on the head. They came here to rob others." As Ojin just stared at the 2 guys in front of him, while they were chuckling to themselves and acting all smug for bullying the weak, and thought, well, I guess it can't be helped at all. He instantly drops down onto his knees and kowtows. With a pitiful face while stuttering he says, "I am sorry. I didn't know that this was your monster." As the 2 guys watched Ojin put on his performance, they were completely caught off guard. They were not expecting Ojin to instantly start groveling before them, which made them both blurt out at the same time, "Huh? What?" As Ojin continues, "I will return all the materials to you." Seeing Ojin almost on the verge of tears, the blonde-haired guy rubs the back of his head and almost felt ashamed. With a stiff smile and an awkward expression he says, "Thank you for, being so understanding." The blonde-haired guy points towards the direction of the mutant and says, "Since this is the case, then let's continue our talk over there." Ojin slowly gets up from the ground, gripping his glaive. Unknown to them, Ojin sneaks up behind them and he swiftly plunged his glaive into the blondie's back, which had completely ran through to the other side, with blood spray out from the center of his chest. Ojin places his head right next to the blondie. With a mocking smile and a sneer he whispers, "You fucking piece of shit. I'm not going to give you anything. In the afterlife, give a tribute to your dead mom." Hearing Ojin's remarks, the blondie coughs out blood once again and died. Startled and in shock, the comb-over guy starts stuttering, "Why you?" In his rage, he charged towards Ojin without a second thought while bellowing, "You crazy bastard!" Ojin just lowers his center of gravity. And when the comb-over slices down with his own glaive, Ojin just sidesteps to the side. Shocked from Ojin's swift and sudden movements, he yells, "This is impossible. How are you so fast? You motherfucker! Did you hide your abilities to lower our guard?" With a murderous glint in his eyes, Ojin says, "Don't make me laugh. Both of you turds are just simply too weak." Ojin then throws his glaive and plunges it into the guy's back, which makes him light up like a Christmas tree, with blue bolts of lightning shooting out from his body, making him squeal out like a pig. With smoke rising into the air from another charred corpse, Ojin just exhales and says, "Phew. Finally some peace and quiet." As he puts his hands on his hips and starts chuckling like a madman again. With a greedy smirk he says, "Well, I guess it is time to finish up and start looting." As he starts pillaging through the bodies, he suddenly came to a realization. He looked over at the dead blonde guy and thought, come to think of it, Black Heaven is able to absorb the mana from stigmas of dead people and could grow even stronger, right? As he was deep in thought, thinking of the consequences of what could happen if he were to go down that route. Because if Vega were to find out about it, all hell would break loose and a catastrophic event would take place, and his ass would be at the center of it all. But just then he thought, fuck it. Isn't that the reason for his other ability, Black Curtain, to prove cover and hide Black Heaven's abilities? As Ojin had finally made up his decision, he places his left hand onto the dude's chest and thought, alrighty then, what would be the worst that could happen? Just then, black smog started to leak out and the stigma began to light up and little sparks start to envelop around Ojin's hand. He then receives multiple notifications. Ding! Black Heaven has begun to absorb the mana from the hunting dog's stigma. Ding! The conditions have been met for the second awakening. Ding! Black Heaven has begun its second awakening. Ojin then groans out in pain. The blue lightning starts to envelop around Ojin's body, while the black smog started to wrap around him and begun slithering up towards his head. As his eyes begun to glow bright blue, Ojin was screaming out in pain and unable to keep his mouth closed. The black smog started to seep into his eyes, ears and mouth. But while Ojin was screaming out in pain, he was unaware and unable to notice, but he received multiple notifications. Ding! Due to awakening, Black Heaven will now begin to read through some records contained in the stigma of Lyra. Ding! The stage of awakening is too low, the amount of records to be seen are restricted. Ding! Loading the records of Awakener Lee Shinhyuk has begun. As the memories started reeling through Ojin's mind, he saw a man standing before him and asking, "Are you awake?" Coming to, Ojin just had only one thought, "Where am I?" Which was followed by another voice, a familiar voice, "Where am I? A hospital ward? How long have I been out for?" It was Shinhyuk's voice that he is hearing, making him realize he was seeing his memories once again. Just then he heard Shinhyuk's brother, Woohyuk, replies by saying, "You are currently in the hospital. You have been in a coma for about 2 weeks now." With no expression on his face, Shinhyuk says, "For 2 weeks?" Woohyuk just closes his eyes with a disgruntled expression and says, "Shinhyuk, why did you go into a gate on your own again?" With a downcast expression, Shinhyuk says, "I'm sorry. I believed everything would be just fine because it was only a low-level 1-star gate." While the room went completely silent, someone knocked on the door twice. As the door opens, a girl with big circled framed glasses, with a high-tied ponytail that had a secretary vibe, came walking in through the door and asks, "Guildmaster, do you happen to have any free time right now?" Woohyuk then asks, "Why? What's wrong?" As she walks forwards and says while making some hand gestures, "Apparently, Chunhyun has found a star relic from that 1-star gate." Woohyuk then says, "What? Changhyuk found a relic?" The secretary then replies by saying, "Yes," but the way he explained the story seemed a little strange. Just then, out of nowhere the memories started to blur, until it completely fizzed out. With a loud and audible gasp, Ojin instantly sits up and was completely drenched in sweat and starts cursing. God damn it. Why the hell does his memories keep flooding into my head? Just then Ojin receives multiple notifications. Ding! You has successfully awakened part of Lee Shinhyuk's inheritance. Ding! Spearmanship of Pixis level has increased, from level 4 to level 5. Ding! A new skill has been acquired, lame excuse level 2. After looking at all the notifications and panting, he couldn't help but exclaim out loud, "What the fuck?" And then he came to the sudden realization, every time he awakens, the more memories he will unlock? And what the fuck is this skill? Lame excuse. But just then, he started to remember, according to Shinhyuk's memories, so on the 15th day of Mokdong, a new gate will appear that will have a star relic. Star relics are artifacts that is concentrated power from the star constellations, and with them, they can help make up the difference between 1 to 2 stars. As Ojin thought about this with his hand on his chin and mumbled, so roughly in about 8 days from now, a gate will appear in Mokdong, which will contain a star relic. With a shit-eating grin, he thought, "God damn. Now this information is what you call real regressor shit." With a devious smile, Ojin looks up towards the sky and says, "Moreover, and very soon, this information will definitely become more useful to me." As the scene changes, Ojin arrives at a massive office building. When he walked inside and noticed that he came at a decent time, because it was not too busy and it even had a counter that was open. After he arrived at the counter and handed all his star stones to the attendant, looking bored as fuck, the lady then said, "At the market prices right now, we can purchase your star stone for $1,440 and after deductions, you will receive a total of $1,152. With a disgusted expression plastered on his face like he ate shit and says, "Fuck." Which startled the attendant, she asks with an uneasy tone, "What?" Realizing his mistake, Ojin just says, "Sorry, just ignore me, I was talking to myself." While inwardly, he imagined some middle-aged old dude, with knee-high socks, in short shorts, sliding across a soccer field while making an O face, and he could not help but think, that is practically like 20% tax. That is fucking daylight robbery. He just sighs deeply and thought, I guess I have no other choice but to accept this farce. As he takes a seat while waiting for his number to be called, with his head resting on his hands, he then hears someone call out, "Ticket number 57. Please come to the front desk," he just said in a lazy manner, "Okay." Once he arrived at the front counter, the lady then asks Ojin for his celestial affiliation, which he replies lazily once again and says, "Lyra." And as if a bomb has went off in the attendant's head, she bellows out, "What?" Not able to believe what she just heard, she just starts stuttering with a stupefied expression and says, "Why wait? Could you explain that to me once again, please? Which celestial are you affiliated with again?" With a bored and agitated expression and tone, he says, "It's Lyra," and then pronounced it more slowly, "Ly-Ra." Completely dumbstruck, her mind went blank and her mouth stuck agape with her body frozen stiff. Getting annoyed of standing around, Ojin calls out once again, "Excuse me. Can you check me out please?" Making her come out of her daze, she blurts out, "Ah. Yes, as she was about to scurry off. Someone came walking up from behind Ojin and asks, "Hey sir? Could you please come with me?" Ojin could only sigh in his heart because he didn't want to raise a big commotion. But who was he kidding? Everyone would be freaked out to see an apostle of the North Star. As he turned around and looked at the man behind him and thought, maybe it would have been better to have hid my affiliations to avoid all these troubles. But then again that would have been a foolish move. Because with strength and fame, it comes with power and authority. The man then leads him to a VIP room and waits for someone to come and get him. The minute he walks through the door, he sees a guy lounging around, with his feet kicked up on top of the coffee table like a prick. It was a man with blonde hair, with his arms draped over the back of the couch while maintaining a thug-like aura around him. With one look the man then asks, "What the hell are you looking at?" As Ojin looks at him, the man clicks his tongue. With his slanted and crooked eyes, he gazes back at Ojin and says, "Are you an idiot? Lower your fucking eyes. Who do you think you are glaring at?" Frowning, Ojin just sneers and thought, who the fucking hell is this bastard?